Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to Next Level Real Talk Podcast, where we have conversations on the journey of personal transformation and the pursuit of lasting peace and happiness with Sheldon and David. Welcome, welcome, everybody, to the Next Level Real Talk Podcast. Here we are.
Welcome back. Welcome back,
Yes.
guys. Hope you had a chance to listen to our first episode where I got to talk about myself a little bit, where I came from, how I started on this journey, and kind of where I am a little bit now. So this time we'd like to take a little time and have Sheldon talk about himself, where he's coming from, and how he got into this journey, and how he's doing. So, Sheldon, talk
Oh,
to us. How'd you get started in this whole journey?
yeah, this is going to be awesome. So we were talking about it before we started, this shooting or whatever, recording that. I've done this a million times and I've screwed it up and I've played around with it and I've struggled with it. So we'll just see how this one goes, because it's, we're, you and I were pushing 6 decades on the planet, right? There's a lot of
Yep.
experiences that we both draw from, but what are the ones that matter in a brief story like this? It's kind of hard for me to pick out because I've got a lot of different shit that's gone down. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but born in Colorado, grew up in Arizona from probably 2 or 3 years old. Dad was a professor, so Tempe, Arizona. It's always what I've considered. I'm an Arizonan uh, um, at the core. Um, you know, definitely had some stuff with racism back in the day because it was late 60s, early 70s through the 70s. I think we were in high
Mm-hmm.
school. I graduated in 82 and
Yep.
all that. So it was a different world than it is now. Arizona was not nearly as diverse as it was. And it's I always feel weird when I say that. And I, for years, never said that there was anything just because, had such great friends, had, great experiences, loved, had a great time at high school and all that kind of stuff. But there wasn't, it would be also unfair to say that there was nothing going on. Uh, that did do things, went on to Naval Academy, um, did pretty good there, had a good time there, went to nuclear power program. And that was, where I, failed out of the nuclear power program. And that was really the first time I've ever experienced not doing well in whatever I was set my mind to. And I ended up being suicidal during that whole period.
Mm-hmm.
And was pretty close to actually doing it. There was actually a senior chief petty officer who kind of had a little intervention on me and essentially saved my life. Um, and then I ended up washing out of the program because of that. And there was some crazy stuff going on. A dude wrote a book about that era of the nuclear power prototype training. An
Oh, wow.
enlisted guy. The suicide rate was astronomical. People were committing suicide left and right, apparently, in enlisted ranks. And I didn't know that. This book just came out like a couple years ago, like 35 years later. This guy's writing
There you
about it.
were part of it. You were part of that, basically.
I
Yeah.
was in there, yeah. And
Yeah.
so, and it was weird because the only people I knew that washed out of phase two were a couple of Asian dudes and a black dude that got kicked out. So, was
Mhm.
there some stuff? I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't. I never said that for 35 years, and a couple of years ago, it's just like maybe it was that.
Yeah.
Um, but it definitely messed me up. I ended up getting out of the Navy early. Was pretty full of guilt, anger, shame. There was a lot of stuff going on. It affected how I was in my relationships. It affected how I was as a leader, as a manager. I was in the auto body world. Um, and I think I was just basically an asshole to the guys because I was like, I'm going to prove that I'm a good leader and I'm going to force it down your throat and I'm going to make you work harder than anybody else to make up for my feelings of inadequacy about what had happened to me and stuff like that. So I think that
Ah,
was, it was
you put it on
also,
them.
yes,
Yeah.
like I'm going to show how good I am by making you,
Mhm.
you better fucking perform, kind of
Yeah.
thing. Um, it was also right after I gotten washed out of the nuke program. I was in surface warfare school in San Diego. I picked up Don Juan Carlos Castaneda, which was the Yaqui Way of Knowledge, which is a Native American book written in like this
Mhm.
late 60s and 70s. Classics. There's like
Yep.
12 of them. I read them all. I also picked up Alan Watts' Tao the Watercourse Way, which was Alan Watts' last book, and probably read 5, 6, 7, 8 of his books, a bunch of his books. He wrote like 20 books, Zen Buddhism and stuff like that. So was getting into all this stuff to try and deal with what I knew was in there. I knew it on a certain level, but you know how you kind of know, but you don't. You're just sort of angry, It
Yeah.
was, and I think when, we met, hung out, you wouldn't know that, oh, Jay Sheldon's got a problem or anything like that. But it's just something that you
Yeah.
carry deep inside you. You know what I mean? You bury it. Um,
Yeah, it's not an outside outward thing at that point, it's just something we feel inside.
yes,
The inadequacy
yes,
inside. Yeah.
yes. And it can color virtually everything that you're looking at in ways that are
Mhm.
far more profound than we realize, right? Until you remove that color, you don't realize how much those things have affected everything that you're looking at, right?
Yeah.
Um, Affected my relationship with my ex, and the way I was, behaving in that, which was not something to be proud of. Um, when we eventually broke up, I found a sifu, which is a Chinese term for like your master. I became a lineage disciple of the Ma San Tao sect of Taoism. So I took ordinations into that. Um, Again, in this pursuit of spiritual peace, of enlightenment, of whatever you want to call it. I was doing meditations and standing on rocks barefoot for 45 minutes to an hour every night, doing breathing exercises. I was hardcore, and it's kind of like, I think that phase, I would probably describe it as where you think you're doing stuff, but you're kind of not, because you're still avoiding the stuff that's way in there.
Mhm. Yeah.
Oh, if I do this breathing exercise well enough, if I meditate long enough, then I'll, peace
Yeah.
will just happen or whatever, right? But
Pushing
I'm
that
not.
away and trying something
Yeah,
else. I don't wanna
exactly.
deal with this. Blech.
Yes. I think a
Mhm.
lot of people in the spiritual world do that. They think that if they do yoga enough, whatever, go enough workshops, that'll take care of it. And yet
Mhm.
it's that internal work that really matters, right? And I would say
Yep.
that that's probably what was happening for me, although it wasn't conscious, right? And it's not that things, I didn't pull back layers of that onion. I didn't start that process, but it definitely was not something that was, released on a very deep and profound level. There was still that anger. And I think that that kind of sense of worthlessness, sense of lack of value of who I am as a human being, as a
Oh.
person, uh, colored the next phase. Because basically, I spent 4 years with my Sifu. When I left, I spent the next 2 years following the routine exactly. So the worst thing I put in my body was Coca-Cola for 6 years. Didn't drink,
Wow.
didn't smoke, didn't know coffee, nothing. And it was really clean. I was meditating every day, 45 minutes to an hour every single day, standing barefoot on these rocks. I mean, the whole 9 yards, right? Pretty hardcore. Um, and I went from that to meeting this girl who was a meth addict.
Mhm. I
And
remember that.
taking a needle and shoving it in my arm and shooting meth,
Mhm.
and people were like, "You're friggin' nuts," Um, and Jacqueline always asked me, like, what would make someone do something like that? And I kind of
Mhm.
never had an answer. I'd read this book, Agora at the Left Hand of God, and it talked about, people immersing themselves and stuff, temptations and stuff, intentionally almost. But I think it fundamentally had to do with when you don't have any self esteem, when you don't feel good about who you are, when you don't give a shit, what difference does it
Uh-huh.
make? I think it was kind
Yeah.
of that. So I was reckless with my own beingness, right? With me. I didn't care. Like, see what happens. No big deal. We'll find out. I don't care. Kind of attitude. I was, pretty promiscuous and did all kinds of crazy stuff sexually. I was just out there, hardcore. And so I went from like this button down thing to the total polar opposite. Thought I was going to help her, and
Mhm.
maybe I was going to help pull her out. But that saying, you're trying to
In
pull
the help
someone out of the,
mode.
jumping in the quicksand doesn't help anybody. You just sink with them, right?
Mhm.
And
Yep.
that's kind of what happened. I spent over 6 years, you know, doing meth, and I would do crack and heroin as well. So I would switch back and forth. It was really weird. I would switch onto crack and heroin, or I'd get off and then I'd switch on to meth. And I didn't do all three at the same time. I kind of went back and forth.
Okay, I'm
But
glad you didn't
yeah,
do all 3 at the time, just so you know, because you're still here.
yeah,
So
I was balancing it. Um, and at the same time, I was, reading spiritual texts. The first time back when I would shoot, I could go up on the rooftop of her place and meditate, loaded, loaded and tweaking through the roof. So there was something about having had these years of practice about how your mind works that when I was pushed into these fairly extreme circumstances, like loaded out of
Hmm.
my mind on drugs and still being able to witness the thoughts, you know, we talk about witnessing. I do
Yep.
think that and I don't mean to encourage in any sort of way, but I do think that there was something to that as a practice, if you will, that actually did benefit in this weird way. Does it make sense? Like,
Hmm. Yeah.
like I was able to witness my mind going bonkers, like off the wall, like most tweakers when they think the feds are outside your house and all that kind of stuff, and the cops are in the bushes and all that kind of stuff. And I've had people
Really?
in my place thinking that, right? So,
Uh-huh.
you know, and able to sort of maintain, you know, that's probably not true. those those people that are behind me talking, I don't think they're there. Yeah. Yep, they're
I
not there.
don't think they're there. Oh
I'm
my
pretty
god.
sure they're not. I can hear them, but I'm pretty sure they're just voices in my head. Let me just take a quick look to make sure. Yeah,
Really?
they're
You
not.
would do that look?
Oh, yeah, I would,
Wow.
but I would say I'm just gonna look just to reassure myself. I'd be at work writing estimates for customers and hear voices in my head, Camilla and them talking, and I'm like,
Wow.
she's not here right now. I know that, but let me just double check. Yeah, she's not.
Oh my gosh.
so
Those are stories I've never heard, so that's good.
so that kind of level of insanity, right?
Hmm.
Uh, but my mom was sending me these cards, 3x5 cards, and they would
Hmm.
have poems and prayers and inspirational quotes on them, and I'd put them on my fridge. And I remember one of the girls I was hanging out with, who was hardcore into crack and heroin, and she was just like, "Where are you getting these cards? Who's writing these things?" I'm like, "Oh, my mom." And she'd be like, "Oh, that explains it." Because I was kind of a weird crackhead. Like I would share my drug. Hey, you want some crack here? And most people don't share the drugs, right? So,
Yeah, no.
um, one of the cards was the prayer of Saint Francis of Assisi. Um,
Mm.
you familiar with that one? Lord, make me an instrument of thy peace. Where there's hatred, let me sow love. Where there's injury, pardon. Where there's doubt, faith. Where there's despair, hope. Where there's darkness, light. So I may ask regret that I may not so much seek to be consoled as consoled, to be understood as understand, to be loved as love. For it is giving that receive, it is parting that we are parting, it is dying that we are born to eternal light. So it's this, beautiful. I
Wow.
thought it was beautiful, and so in the middle of all the shit I was doing, I started saying that prayer thousands of times. At the time, I was functional. I was had a job, and I would have to go from the Bay Area to Sacramento area. It's like 2.5 hour drive, and I never had the radio on. And I would just say that prayer like a mantra thousands of times all day
Do,
long.
do me a favor again, because you obviously have it memorized because you said it a million times. You said it a little bit fast. Say it slower so people can hear it, because I'd
If
like
I
to hear the
say
whole
it
thing.
slow, I'll screw it up.
Oh, really?
Yes,
You
I
say it
gotta.
so fast.
Yes, because I just was used
Okay.
to saying it. When I slow it down, it'll screw it up. Maybe we can put it in the comments or something, and I'll
Okay.
put it in
Okay.
there.
We'll do that. Yeah.
It's a beautiful prayer, and technically, I don't think they associate it with Saint Francis. Like may not have really written it.
Hmm.
Regardless, it's a
It is.
beautiful
Okay.
prayer, and I
Well,
said
yeah,
it.
we'll put down in the comments 'cause I'd like to see it too. So, okay.
I said it all the freaking time. Lord makes me as a piece of your part in dark faith, darkness. Lord, may grant divine master grant that man so both souls consult the understanding and love is given and received. Parting we are part is dying that we're born to life. Lord, make me a sin of my peace. I mean, I just fucking said that thing so many times. Can't even tell you. And I'm shooting meth, doing this freaking thing, smoking crack, doing this thing. And I did it for probably over a year to probably between a year to 2 years of doing that thing, like constantly. And then, and I would go to, NA programs and I would try to, blah, 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 and whatever. And, throw the box away of my shit. And then I have to go buy out my gear because I tried to quit like a million times, and I had a little box, of all my stuff and my paraphernalia, and I throw it away, and then I have to go buy all the new shit again, and it's like, God damn it. And then one day I was sitting there after a couple of years, and I was doing meth, and I had a pipe in my hand, and I was just looked at it, and I just went, "This is not who I am," and pew, it felt like
Done.
somebody was pushing their weight on on my shoulders, and it just went straight in the air. It just felt like this weight just went energetic weight.
Wow.
And Bill W., who's the founder of AA, had a very similar experience where it was a room filled with light, and then he said he was healed. And that's what happened to me. It wasn't, I felt the vibration energetically just dissipate off of me. And I was like, I literally had this meth pipe in my hand and I'm like,
What is
I'm
this?
done.
Yeah. A
I'm
total
done.
change. Boom.
I'm done. Chucked it.
Hmm.
I had shit in it and I trucked it. Any meth head will know that that's not something you do.
Nope. You don't
I
finish
had
it off
everything.
and then throw it away.
I had it loaded and I was just like, I'm done.
Wow.
Never, yeah, never went back, never relapsed. You know, and it was very shortly after that, within a couple of months, that I walked into a bookstore. And that's another. I mean, I have so many crazy stories. Like I should have been arrested. I had
Hmm.
angels. I had guidance. I'm telling you, I should have been arrested a couple of times where we got pulled over and searched by the cops. I mean, full on
Wow.
loaded, had a ball of crack in my fucking pocket, pipe, whole 9 yards. And he didn't search. He was trying to find the car, but couldn't find anything because I had cleaned the car spotlessly the night before.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
because the girl I was with was going to see her kids, and I didn't want her
Mm.
kids to have any evidence, so I cleaned the holy living shit out of that freaking car for her, and it was spotless. And the cop was like flashing his flashlight because it's like they need probable cause. Couldn't find a thing. Couldn't find a thing.
Mm.
There wasn't a thing in that thing. And the day before, it had looked like a nightmare. Drug shit everywhere. I cleaned that thing. Anyway, stuff like that. Um,
So
so
as
there
you
was
as you yeah, go ahead.
so
Uh,
and then right after I got clean, um, another kind of really, I don't know. So um, I was doing Carolyn Meese, who is a woman who's a medical medium. She could heal people. If she talked to you, she would know exactly what was wrong with you. So people like, I got this problem. And she go, oh, it's because when you were 5 years old, blah 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 blah. She would just like kind of get this intuitive hits,
mhm.
and she was super super accurate. She was like a smoking, gum chewing reporter, hardcore reporter, and all of a sudden she had this gift. And so now she's out there as like a spiritual teacher, written like 10, 15 books. One of her books was called, I think it's called Anatomy of the Spirit. And she was creating these archetypes. Um, like, the prostitute is an archetype, oh, what do you sell a little bit of your soul for? You go to a job that you hate, but you sell part of your joy because you need the money. That's like prostitute. That's the energy of
Mm.
prostitution, right? Maybe you're in a relationship where you're not really fulfilled. The energy of prostitution, you're giving, well, but it makes me secure, or whatever, right? So we all have that dynamic a little bit, right? And then maybe the hero, where are you the savior to people? And oh, I'm the good guy and all that, right? And where are you
Mhm.
the villain? And there's a million different of these archetypes, like Jungian type archetypes. And she's written a book about kind of doing like almost like an astrological chart on your archetypes. And I was working on this. This is part of this story, what happened. So another one of these super miraculous, crazy things that happened to me. Um, and so I was writing on 3x5 cards these archetypes because she had hundreds of them listed in the glossary of the book. And I ended up going through an entire deck of 3x5 cards, and I was like halfway through the freaking glossary, and I was pissed off because now I'm gonna have to go buy. I happen to have a whole deck, and I was making like flashcards with the archetype name and then the description on the back. And I'm like, Jesus, she should have these fucking cards made in the deck so that I don't have to do this crap. So I could just buy them and do this stupid exercise she wants me to do. Why don't they have these cards in a fucking deck that I could just, go out and buy? Sean comes over, my buddy. He's like, hey, want to go to dinner? We go to San Mateo. We're downtown, walking around downtown San Mateo. There's a bookstore I walked past like a million times that was always closed at dinner time, right? So it's like 6:30. We're walking by and it's open. And I'm like, hey, I've been wanting to check that book out. It was called Sacred Paths Bookstore. And I'm like, hey, I want to check that bookstore. You mind if I pop my head in there real quick? He's like, sure. So we would walk in there, and there's a dude standing by this door to a room, like a private room inside the bookstore.
Mhm.
And he's standing there. I walk up and I'm looking around. He's just like, oh, hey, you you here for the Course in Miracles study group? And I'm like, no. And I'm like, kind of walk away. He goes, oh, you ever heard of Course in Miracles? I'm like, actually, I have, because I had read another book by Wayne Dyer where, sometimes a book will have like a little quote on the top of the chapter.
Yeah. Mhm.
It had like 3 chapters where the quote was from A Course in Miracles.
Oh, wow.
And I remember reading that and saying, isn't that same freaking book the guy's quoting? in the other chapter? And I literally went back and I'm like, yeah, there it is. Fuck Course in Miracles again. Like maybe I ought to just read that book instead of reading this dude's book because he keeps referencing
Just
that
keeps
book.
quoting it. Yeah.
You know what I mean? If it's such a freaking great book, why don't I just go to the source?
Yeah.
And so anyway, so that was my recollection. So this guy standing there, Scott, who's one of my best friends now, and he says, like, hey, you here for the Course in Miracles? I'm like, no. And walking around, and he's following me. And I think we had motorcycle helmets because we had ridden. And at the time, I don't think I even had a car. And so he's like, oh, you ride? And I'm like, yeah. And I'm thinking to myself, I remember distinctly, dude, you keep fucking following me, we're gonna have a problem.
Mhm.
like literally stop following me. Like I'm thinking this, like back the fuck off. I don't need you following me around the goddamn bookstore asking me stupid questions. Like that's literally what was going through my brain, right? And but he's asking me about writing and Course in Miracles, and I'm like, yeah, actually I have heard that book. I've heard of it. I don't know it. And then as I'm walking through the bookstore, there's the Course in Miracles book and Carolyn Meese's archetype cards.
Mm.
You know, the cards that I had just said
Yep.
an hour earlier, they ought to have these freaking cards made up in a deck so that you can just
Yeah.
buy them. There was the deck,
They
literally
were.
touching the Course in Miracles book side by side on the foot. It's not alphabetical, whatever, you know what I mean? It was just
Mhm.
like they're touching. And I'm looking at that, and the hairs on the back of my neck go up. My whole body is like freaking out. And I'm like, all right, I'm pretty slow. I'm a slow learner, but I can
Mhm.
take that fucking hint right there. And like, maybe I'm supposed to do something with this stupid book. And then I was so broke at the time that I bought the Carolyn Meese archetype cards, and I didn't even want to spend the money to buy the Course in Miracles. And so Scott was following me around, and so he goes, I'm like, what is this? It was happened to be the very first night of that study group, Course in Miracles study group, and he was a facilitator. And he goes, tonight's our first night. That's why I was wondering if you're coming. And I'm like, nope. Said, tell you what, when's it going to be? And he's like, every Wednesday, 6:30 or whatever. I said, all right, I'll come next Wednesday. And
Mm.
that's what started me down this path of this book. And so I think the next day or a couple days later, I went back to that bookstore and I figured if I'm going to go to this stupid meeting, I should buy the freaking book. You know what I mean? At least read it. And so that's when I started down this path with the Course in Miracles, and which is a particular teaching. I always say that it's kind of like Buddhism in Christian language. It
Mhm.
really teaches you about the mind and how the mind works and the heart and stuff like that, and the whole relationship and connection. Um, and Scott ended up living with me for a while, and then ended up moving back to Seattle. And I ended up taking over the Course in Miracles study group and being the facilitator for like 8 years. Um, and so that journey really accelerated this whole turning inwards and really paying attention to what your mind and how your mind plays and what it is, and shifting the relationship to thought itself into your egoic mind structure, the thoughts that are in your head versus what's coming in your heart
Yeah.
and all of that. So that was the thing that was the most transformative experience those 8 years. um, as I facilitated a group like every Wednesday, and I probably missed. I was super dedicated. I missed like maybe 5 Wednesdays in 8 years.
Oh, wow.
I mean, we would go Wednesday before Thanksgiving. We had meetings. We did it every Wednesday. It almost didn't matter. If it's the day before Christmas Eve, we were having the meeting. If it's Christmas Eve, we didn't do it. But if it's the day before, we did.
Wow.
I mean,
So were you guys going inside yourselves, dwelling into what was there?
yeah, we would share. And it
Mm.
was a
Oh, okay.
circle of probably 10 people that were pretty darn 8 to 10 people every week.
Uh-huh.
And they are some of my closest friends and soul family to this day, because we all went through that journey. We used to throw a Kleenex box in the middle of the circle and be every week somebody would be sharing, and somebody
Mhm.
would be sharing about, this is what happened to me, or I was looking at this, or this came up for me and I got mad about this. And we're learning how to look at the world differently, and
Yeah.
through the lessons. And the course has these lesson plan. It's 365 lessons you're supposed to do one a day for a year. And so these things would come up, and it's a whole framework of how you're observing. And basically everything that I've ever shared with you, or everything that Michael Singer in his book, it's very similar. It's the same
The
idea. It's
untethered,
universal.
untethered soul. That the one you're
Yes,
talking about?
Untethered Soul.
Untethered soul. Yep.
They're all universal ideas. Um, but
Great
that
book. Read it if you can.
Yeah, yes. But that was the biggest sort of transformational process. The other thing that started happening was I started being able to lay hands on people and heal them.
Hmm.
So I started doing hands-on healing, like I could just touch somebody and then they would get better.
Wow,
So I've had
that's
some
awesome.
crazy, I've had some crazy shit with that too.
Crazy stuff, man.
Uh, yeah. So because it was all freaking me out.
Hmm.
Was not. Part of me was really open to it, and part of me was freaking out. So, um, kind of talking about it out like this, public and releasing this thing out is freaking me out. Um, uh, I don't even think most of my family even knows what Course in Miracles is. I never talked about it with them. So it's
Hmm.
not something that I was particularly public about. Um, it's where I met Jacqueline. So, outing her too.
Jacqueline is his wife, by the way. That's his
Yeah,
wife.
yeah. So,
Beautiful, wonderful, awesome lady.
so you know, um, uh, but all of that was um, that was I think the biggest thing that really accelerated the transformational process, the journey within, the looking inside, and this sort of rapid unfolding of miracles. One of the things, of course, Miracles says that miracles are a natural state of mind, that if you're in your kind of natural connected state, miracles should happen effortlessly because that's sort of what just happens, which, you've experienced, right? Where just stuff flows,
Hmm.
stuff happens,
Yeah.
things happen. You're like, oh, well, there it goes again. Oh, that's cool. Whatever. And you're just flowing along and things seem to keep falling in place. And that's essentially one of the things that the Course in Miracles defines as, when you're in a healed state, that's what happens. And so those things started happening um, on a regular and kind of wild basis. Uh, so, I did healing on people for a while where I was putting myself out there as, hey, this is something um, that is possible. Had all kinds of really trippy and cool experiences with that. And I still do it. I travel all over the country with my current job, and I've laid hands on a bunch of dudes and healed them. Some pretty
Hmm.
crazy stuff.
Awesome.
Motorcycle wrecks with spinal fusion and rods and all that, and they're like in pain all the time. And I'm like, here, let me try this, and they're like, oh my god, I don't have any pain. First time ever
Wow.
in 10 years. What the heck? Oh my god, and they're freaking out. I was like,
Yeah.
don't thank me, just thank whoever you want.
Hmm. Because
Just go
we
up.
all have our person. Yep.
Yeah, yeah.
Yep.
Just however you want to do it, just go.
Whoever your person is, they just gave me the
Yeah,
power. Yep.
yeah.
Exactly.
It's a flow through,
The healing power. Yeah.
which it
Wow.
is. I can feel it. It's like comes in the top of the head and goes out. So, um, it goes over the top of the arms and stuff like that. It's just like there's like a heat in a
Hmm.
flow that happens. Um, so anyway, I started down this journey of healing people, working with people. Um, but it's also a process for yourself, right? It's layers of this onion that are continually unfolding. You know,
Yeah.
um,
Hmm.
stuff still
There's a.
triggers you. You still get triggered by different things.
Hmm. Yep.
You still have those moments.
But it's
I used to
noticing what triggers you and knowing how to deal with that trigger
I used
is
to
what's
say it
helping
was
you.
like, if this is a
Yep.
day, like 3 feet long, like a yardstick for those who are just listening, if you got like a
Hmm.
yardstick and it's a ruler that's 3 feet long, and uh, 2 feet, 11 inches of it are stress and anxiety and fear and anger and frustration. And then that 1 inch is that time that if that yardstick measures a year and that 1 inch is that time you went to Hawaii and you sat on the beach and had a Mai Tai on the beach and said, oh, the world is perfect and I feel great and everything's happy and beautiful. And then you go back to the rest of your normal life and it's stress and anxiety and all that
Hmm.
kind of stuff. And that's how most of us are living our lives, right? Is from one stressful event to another, from one trauma to another, from one thing to another. And what happened for me was it started to the 1 inch became 2 inches, became 3 inches, became 4 inches a
Yeah.
piece that were
Hmm.
offset. And then it became to where it's almost the opposite, where it feels like 2 feet, 11 inches are pretty peaceful. And then the one
Yep.
inch is the occasional stress that flares itself up and you get through it. And then you're back
Hmm.
to a baseline state that's pretty darn happy. And that's kind of what we were talking about, right?
Yeah. And I don't know how much more you got to talk about some things that you talked about right off the bat. Just to when you said you felt like at Nuke School, you felt like you were the only one going through it. But then here comes a book years later. It's like we're not in this alone,
Yeah.
and we all
True.
think we're in this alone.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
it's like
Yeah.
no, we're not. So Little did you know, there's a book about all these guys doing the exact same thing, having the same symptoms, quote unquote,
Uh,
suicidal. But wow, so it's the thing of be willing to open up. It's hard to talk to people and say, I'm having an issue.
yeah.
Because guess what? They may have that, oh, here's what I did in this issue. Here, I can't go here, but I can get someone that went through exactly the same thing you did. We don't know who's where. I mean,
S-
with my divorce stuff, I went to Kara. Kara was talking to me, and then turned roundabout. I'm back in her office. She's crying. I'm talking to her, getting her through it. And then my friend Becky calls me and says, "Hey, I'm having this time. I'm going through a divorce. Can you talk to me?" Boom, 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 boom. Be
Yeah.
willing to just one conversation opened up. A lot of us. So you just it's hard because we feel alone, and we will because it's me. It's all about me. It's my problem. No, it's okay.
Yeah. And
So,
we don't know the power of that one encouraging moment.
yep.
That one word, that one 5 minutes you might have spent with somebody or somebody spent with you or whatever, to say,
Hmm.
hey, it's okay or whatever. Though I think that sometimes we underestimate the power of that to
Yeah.
transform somebody's life, to lift them up, to maybe keep them alive. You don't know.
Yeah.
Um,
That
that
may have been
senior
that
chief
moment.
petty officer, pulling me into his office, I'm like, oh, you gotta be freaking kidding me. I'm
Yeah.
gonna get yelled at by a senior chief right now. Are you fucking shitting me right now? And then he was just like, he was kind and asked me some questions, and I broke down, I was crying and all this stuff. But that essentially was an intervention,
Hmm.
and changed, saved my life. So
Yeah.
uh, so we don't know that, how powerful those moments can be, but we also have to understand, and I guess this is what we'll be talking about next week, right? Is
Hmm.
that story, my story that I just shared, was kind of like this, hey, there's these things that happened, and you know one
Wake
thing
up
leads,
calls.
wake
What
up
got us
calls.
to what gets you to this point?
Right.
Because you had several points of the opportunity to get to that point.
I'm a
We'll
slow
leave it at
learner,
that
I
for now.
told you.
We'll talk about that next week.
I'm a slow learner.
We'll bring it up next week. um, but yeah, that's it's just being able to recognize where's this moment and how do I, instead of jumping off a ledge at that moment, saying, "Okay, here I am. This is not good. How do I get there? How do I get back?"
Yeah.
And it took me a long time to get back to a peace and happiness of where I was,
Hmm.
but it took a lot of different people.
Yeah.
And so that's definitely something we'll talk about next week. And another thing you talked about at the beginning is who we are on the inside, sometimes not who we are on the outside. We're not
Hmm.
showing who we really are.
Yeah.
Um, you and I, happy go lucky, yeah, we're great people at certain times, woo-woo. But inside, it's a turmoil. It's hard. It sucks. It's
Yep.
ulcerish,
Yep.
if you want to call it that. It's just
Yep.
bad.
It's like an
But then,
infection,
yeah,
infestation,
and then it
cancer. It's
started
like,
coming out the way you talk to your employees, the way I talk to my friends and people. It was just, it was the anger,
yep.
you know, and so yeah, that's something. And our pastor, Pastor Darren, I'll use him. I'm sure he's fine with that. But Pastor Darren always talks about it's not what our past was. It's like, yes, I've had this junk. There's junk. Okay, if you want to pull it out, go ahead, because I ain't going to. I went past it. So yes, there's junk, but how do you get past that junk? Is
Right.
what you need to work on, and that's what
Yes.
we want to do. Is help people.
Talk
You're
about how we
starting to
did
get in.
it. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's
Talk
like
about
ours
how
is
we
not
did it.
always the perfect way to get out of it
Right.
or get through it, but this is ways to do it. Like you were saying, all of a sudden you're like, wait, I don't want to be doing this
Yep.
because you started doing something,
Yep.
which I would have never, I out there, okay, in podcast land, I would have never put $1 million on Sheldon Joe s- reciting, the, what'd you say, the St.
St.
Francis,
Francis,
which one?
prayer of St. Francis of
Yeah,
Assisi.
prayer saying he would never. No, I would not put $1 million on that for Sheldon Joe, and you know that. And I don't say that in a mean way. Just
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
wasn't Sheldon Joe,
Yeah.
and that saved his life. So
Yeah.
cool. so so you
That
never know what's
sucker,
going to trigger you.
that
So
sucker transformed me, man. That sucker,
I love it. I
that
love
thing
it.
is, yeah, it's huge,
Yeah.
huge thing
So
in my
for
life.
yeah, so if you're out there listening and or watching, we'll put that in the little blurb down here below later on, and then we'll also put the information about the book, "The Untethered Soul" by Michael Singer. It's a really good book. If you get a chance to read it, it's some of the
Yeah.
stuff we'll eventually talk about more. So
Yep.
it's it's kind of cool. So
So yeah, in the next
so
episode, we'll
yep,
talk about wake up calls, because it is, that journey of personal transformation does have cause us. There's a place where eventually you have to start looking at yourself and kind of starting to say,
Mm.
okay, what can I do to shift how I'm feeling right now?
Yeah.
Versus, you know, when the whole world changes, when the US government completely finally overhauls itself, when the economy is completely different, when everybody I know stops behaving the way they are because they're all a bunch of assholes. When everybody shifts, right? When the whole world outside changes, then I can be happy.
Hmm.
And that's essentially what most of us do on some level. May not be that dramatic, but there's some level of if only this would be, then I would be okay. And the problem with
Yeah.
that is that that bar keeps moving all the time because if you ever get that one thing, then you're just waiting for something else and you just want something else, right? So that
Hmm.
externalized, when the external circumstances are such, then I'll feel good inside versus I can feel good inside right now, regardless of the external circumstances, and then bringing that into
Hmm.
your world as you walk and talk throughout the day. Like, how do you do that, or what is it that causes it? Like my mom used to have a saying, she go, "I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired,"
Yeah.
you know. And that's
Hmm.
generally speaking what most people need, right? You got to get sick and tired of being sick and tired, and at some point you're going, "All right, what can I do differently?"
Yeah.
And some people
And
don't.
that's what we want to talk about next week.
Yes. And
Exactly.
so that's what
Where do
we'll
you
be
get to that
talking about
point?
next week is, you know, how do you get there?
Yeah.
Hopefully you don't have to
So,
get there so dramatically or so bad, right? Hopefully it doesn't
yeah.
need to be dramatic. It can just be, you know what, I am a little irritated and I find
So I need to
myself tired
find
at
that
the end.
peace and happiness. Yeah.
Yeah, I find myself tired at the end of the day. I'm irritated. I got a lot of anxiety about what's going on in the world right now. Got anxiety about
Hmm.
elections. I got anxiety about the economy. I've got anxiety about all this stuff. Can I feel better now without any of that having to change? And the answer
Getting
is
to the
yes.
major point. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
how do you do that? So
And that's what we want to talk about definitely because
yeah,
that's where we all were. And so
tips
now
and
that you got to know me a little bit, and now you got to know Sheldon a little bit, we've talked about ourselves, but we're going to start talking about some things that can really you can recognize and then start working your way to that peace and happiness. So it's a
yeah.
great journey when you. It's sometimes a tough journey, but it's a fun journey as you're getting there because you're knowing where you're coming. And believe me,
Yes.
we can attest to it.
Yes.
It's a great getting on this side of that journey. So
For sure. For sure. So
so look
hopefully
forward
that
to.
was not too painful.
Yep,
So
and we
all
look
right.
forward to seeing you all next week.
We'll see you guys next week. Thank you. Thanks for listening or watching or whatever. By the way, we're
Yes,
going to post this thing on YouTube now. We've been having a hard time with that, but we're getting there.
awesome.
So
We'll see y'all next week.
take care.